Right, hello everybody. It's good to be back post COVID. I'm trying to think. Last time I was here, it would have been about 2 years ago, and it was it was sort of on the horizon. It was a sort of nasty virus over in China, but it's great to be back here. I'm preaching this afternoon on Ephesians 5:25-33. Someone said to me earlier, when I told them I was preaching on this, they said, "Oh, you got the short straw." I don't think that's the case. I think I don't know if I've got the short straw. But anyway, here goes. Husbands, love your wives, just as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her to make her holy, cleansing her by washing her with water through the word, and to present her to himself as a radiant church without stain or wrinkle or any other blemish, but holy and blameless. In this same way, husbands ought to love their wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself. After all, no one ever hated their own body, but they feed and care for their body just as Christ does the church. For we are members of this body. For this reason, a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. This is a profound mystery, but I am talking about Christ and the church. However, each of you must also love his wife as he loves himself, and the wife must respect her husband. Okay, so the first thing I wanted to say in relation to this passage was that marriage in biblical times was very different to what it is now. Culturally, in the here and now, we tend to marry for love. Okay, we tend to marry for love. Isn't that right? Isn't that right, dear? Yeah, we tend to marry for love. So if you talk to married couples, they will explain, where we met and how we met and how our love developed or whatever, and how it blossomed. Then we decided to get married. Back in biblical times, it's very different. The tradition then was that marriages were arranged between two families. So to think of an example of a famous biblical married couple, I'm thinking Mary and Joseph. Okay, so I came up with Mary and Joseph. The Bible doesn't say how they got together, but I'm guessing that their eyes didn't meet across a crowded dance floor, nor did they go on a blind date arranged by mutual friends, and they certainly did not meet online. So marriage back then was something very different. It wasn't necessarily about love. Now, when we husbands, we read this command, love your wives, we're probably thinking, well, of course I love my wife. Why do you think I married her? You're pushing against an open door here, Paul. So it looks like us men have got off lightly. All we have to do is love our wives. And that certainly comes naturally, surely. The second thing to say is this. The passage, Paul's letter to the Ephesians in this passage, it's very light on advice as to how we should love our wives, okay? So having been instructed as husbands that we've got to love our wives, Paul doesn't give us any real hints or tips as to how we might put this into practice. So he doesn't say, husbands, love your wives, buy them flowers, take them for a nice meal, write them love poetry, compliment them when they have their hair done, or in my case, actually notice when they've had their hair done. Cook them a nice meal. There's none of that. There's no advice about how we should love our wives. Instead, Paul is interested in this. It's the how much rather than the how. And this is something that is kind of repeated in the Bible. We come across it quite a few times. Another good example is when Jesus exhorts us to love the Lord our God. Again, he doesn't give us examples. He doesn't say, love the Lord your God, read his word, attend church regularly, sing songs of praise, pray. He doesn't give us examples. What he says, again, it's about the how much. He tells us, love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your mind. That's what he says in Matthew's gospel. That's true, like I said, with this passage. So after Paul tells us we must love our wives, he then spells out about how much, not the how. First he says this, love your wives just as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. So I guess in that phrase, we kind of get the how and the how much. How much did Christ love the church? Well, he gave himself up for her. So the love we see here is sacrificial. It's love as sacrifice. In a husband and wife relationship, we think of gain. I, the husband, gained a wife when I married Miriam. But at the same time, we are also making a sacrifice. We are giving ourselves up. Verse 31 of the passage says, a man will leave his father and his mother and will be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. For that to happen, we have to make a sacrifice. The love, I think, that Paul is talking about, in English, love is got to be one of the hardest working words in the English language. It covers so many different things. I love my wife. I love God. I love going to church. I love chicken jalfrezi. I love your shoes. It covers so many different things. So it's helpful to go to the Greek, to turn to the Greek, if we're going to understand this love that Paul is telling us about. So the love that he's talking about is agape love. That is unconditional love, sacrificial love. That's what's being asked of us as men. Christ's love for the church was agape love. Now, we as a society today in the West, we've moved towards a society where the rights of the individual are seen as tantamount, including our rights to happiness. So we're in a culture that tends to concentrate on things such as self-fulfillment. Our needs must be met. We talk of things of like self-discovery, and there's an emphasis on ourselves, our hopes, our ambitions, our dreams, our happiness, our fulfillment. And the more we do that, the more we concentrate on ourselves, the more difficult agape love becomes, because that speaks of self-denial, self-sacrifice. And we could say in society we are facing a bit of a crisis in love. The more we focus on ourselves, the harder agape love with its self-sacrifice becomes. We tend to focus more on eros love, love of the sensual and the passionate, and there is a time and a place for that, but not at the exclusion of agape love. If you want to build a long and lasting relationship, eros will only get you so far. You can't go the whole distance without agape love. And there's no crisis with eros love. There's no shortage of contestants for Love Island. There's no crisis with eros love. So we need to love our wives as Christ loved the church. Sacrificial love, agape love. A love that isn't based on self-fulfillment, but on self-sacrifice. We need to love our wives as Christ loved the church. The second way we're called to love our wives is as we love our own bodies. Verse 28 says, husbands ought to love their wives as their own bodies. This isn't a call to turn us into narcissists. We're not suddenly going to be spending hours in the bathroom. We're not suddenly going to be splashing out on expensive grooming kits. It's more about caring for your body than worshipping it. Taking good care, not about being vain. Just taking good care of yourself. Verse 29 says, after all, no one ever hated their own body, but they feed and care for the body. So again, it's about the how much rather than the how. Love your wife as Christ loved the church. Love your wife like you love your own body. In the middle of the passage, of verse 28, there's this intriguing line. He who loves his wife loves himself. What do we make of that? Well, again, it's speaking of the depth of love, the how much, but it speaks of that closeness of the relationship between man and wife. It's a relationship so close that in loving your wife, you're in fact loving yourself. The two become one. And when I was thinking about this, I was like, I don't know, fiddling with my wedding ring. And because the wedding ring sort of represents that eternity of the relationship. There's no beginning and end. It's an eternal relationship between husband and wife. But it also could represent, I was thinking about this, the sort of flow of love between the husband and wife, a love that is reciprocated as you sacrifice and love your wife, so that love is reciprocated. So in loving your wife, you are in fact loving yourself, and there's this eternal flow of love. So husbands who love their wives love themselves, and this love is like constantly recycled like a ring. I know that sounds a bit twee, a bit happy ever after, but as I said earlier, this isn't about eros love. It's not about feeling and sensations. This is agape love, tough, sacrificial love. So it might sound a bit romantic and soppy, but agape love certainly isn't. I wanted this sermon to go beyond just talk of marriage, because not everyone here is married. There are single people in the congregation. And I think what Paul says here is relevant to everybody. In this passage, it speaks about here a relationship between a husband and wife. But what we learn about here, what is vital for a good, healthy marriage, can also teach us something about our relationship with God. As I mentioned earlier, the principle of love as given in the Bible tends to be based around the idea of how much rather than how. And that, of course, applies to our relationship with God. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, and all your mind. As Christians, we believe that God's love for us is agape. It's unconditional. It's selfless and sacrificial. It's grace in action. And we believe we have to accept that. We have to believe that God's love is unconditional. If not, then we will try and work out our salvation on our own. We'll try and trust in our own goodness and in our own strength. But also we need to understand that God's love is also reciprocal. We need to respond to his love to us, and our love for him should also be agape. It's about surrender. It's about self-sacrifice, surrendering ourselves to God, giving all to him, mind, body, and soul. And these are the things that don't come easy to us: surrender and self-sacrifice. The self wants to put itself first. So there is a connection, I think, between the love of a man for his wife and the love of a person for God. And it is that same agape love. It is that same self-sacrifice and that same surrender. So with love in marriage and our relationship with God, it's all about how much rather than how. It's agape. And the challenge then is to ask ourselves, in the words of that famous Bee Gees song, how deep is your love? Amen.